It's past midnight when Adrian Hayes steps off his private elevator, drained from another endless day. And here's something that stops him cold. A voice, soft and low, drifting from his dying daughter's room. His little girl, who hasn't smiled or spoken in months, is smiling in her sleep, and the new maid is sitting beside her bed, singing a lullaby. A beautiful moment, until he realizes the words of that song belong to his dead wife, a melody no living soul outside his family was ever supposed to know. But before diving into these incredible stories about love, loss, and impossible second chances, do me one quick favor before we begin. Tap that like button, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching this video right and what time in your city. I read every single one. Now, let's step into the dark. Adrian Hayes loosened his tie as the private elevator carried him to the top floor of his Connecticut estate. It was 12:14 in the morning. Another 17-hour day at Hayes Capital had left him hollow, the kind of tired that sleep no longer fixed. He'd built an empire from nothing. He owned towers in 3 cities and a name that opened any door in the country, and none of it, not $1 of it, had been able to save the only thing that mattered. His daughter, Lily, was dying. She was 6 years old. For the past year, ever since they lost her mother, the little girl had been slipping away, first into silence, then into stillness, and now into a sickness the finest doctors in the world could only shrug at. She no longer laughed. She no longer cried. She simply lay in her bed, fading, like a candle someone had forgotten to relight. Adrian had stopped expecting miracles. The doors slid open onto the dim, silent hallway. He moved toward his bedroom out of habit, and then he stopped. A sound was coming from the end of the corridor, from Lily's room. A voice, soft, warm, almost a whisper. Someone was singing. His chest tightened. He stepped closer, his polished shoes silent on the rug, until he reached the door, left ajar, and a sliver of golden lamplight spilled into the hall. What he saw made his breath catch. Sitting on the edge of his daughter's bed was Grace Bennett, the new housekeeper his staff had hired only weeks ago to manage the upstairs rooms. She held Lily's small, frail hand in both of hers, swaying gently as she sang. And Lily, his Lily, the child who hadn't shown a flicker of life in months, was smiling in her half-sleep, her lips curved upward, her breathing slow and peaceful for the first time since Claire died. For a moment, Adrian's heart soared higher than it had in a year. Then he heard the words, and every drop of warmth in his body turned to ice. "Hush now, little star. You're never far. I'll find you in the morning light." Adrian's hand gripped the doorframe. Those words, that melody. It was Claire's song. His wife had written it herself, late in her pregnancy, humming it to her swelling belly in the dark of their bedroom. She'd never recorded it, never written it down. She used to laugh and say it was Lily's song and nobody else's. After Claire died, Adrian had tried to sing it once, sitting beside his daughter's bed, and the grief had closed his throat so completely he couldn't finish a single line. No one knew that song. No one could know it. It had lived and died inside the 4 walls of their family. And yet here was a stranger, a woman he'd exchanged maybe 10 words with, singing it note for note, word for word, as if she'd known Claire her whole life. His mind reeled. Who was this woman? How had she walked into his home, into his daughter's most private grief, carrying a piece of his wife that should have died with her? Grace reached the end of the verse and let the last note fade into the quiet. Lily sighed in her sleep and turned her head toward the sound, the faint smile still resting on her lips. That was when Grace felt him there. She looked up and froze. Her eyes went wide, the color draining from her face. She rose so quickly she nearly knocked over the small lamp on the nightstand. "Mr. Hayes," she breathed. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to overstep. I was bringing Lily her water and she was restless. She couldn't settle and I just..." The words tumbled out, panicked. "I'll go. It won't happen again. I promise. Where did you learn that song? His voice came out lower than he intended, rough at the edges. It didn't sound like an employer. It sounded like a man holding himself together by a thread. Grace went still. Something flickered across her face. Not just fear of losing her job, but something deeper. Something that looked almost like sorrow. It's just an old lullaby, sir, she said quietly, dropping her gaze. Something I picked up a long time ago. I didn't think— That song, Adrian interrupted, stepping into the room, does not exist anywhere in the world. My wife wrote it. For our daughter. She never sang it to a single person outside this family. The silence between them stretched, thick and trembling. And then, from the bed, came a voice he had almost forgotten the sound of. Small, sleepy, but unmistakable. "Daddy!" Adrian spun around. Lily's eyes were open. She was looking right at him, really looking, in a way she hadn't in months. "Daddy," she murmured. "Can she sing it again? It makes the scary feeling go away." Adrian sank to his knees beside the bed, his composure shattering, tears spilling before he could stop them. His daughter had spoken. "Sing it, please," Adrian whispered, his voice breaking. "Sing it for her." Grace lowered herself back onto the edge of the bed. She took Lily's hand again, and after a shaky breath, she began the lullaby once more. Softer this time, as if she knew the man kneeling on the floor could not bear it any louder. Lily's eyes fluttered closed, her small fingers curled around Grace's, and slowly, like a tide going out, the tension left the little girl's body. Within minutes, she was asleep, but a different sleep than Adrian had seen in a year. Not the gray, lifeless stillness of a child fading away. A real sleep, a peaceful one. Adrian stayed on his knees, watching his daughter breathe until the song ended and the room fell quiet. "Mr. Hayes," Grace said gently, "she's resting now. I really should— Tomorrow," he said. "We'll talk tomorrow, please. I need to understand." Grace hesitated, then nodded, and slipped out of the room like a shadow. Adrian didn't move for a long time. He sat in the dark beside his sleeping daughter, the impossible melody still echoing in his ears, and for the first time since the funeral, he felt something flicker in his chest that he'd thought was gone forever. Hope. He barely slept. By the time the morning light flooded the breakfast room, Adrian had already replayed the night 100 times. A stranger knew Claire's song. A stranger had reached his unreachable daughter. Both of those things should have been impossible, and yet he had witnessed them with his own eyes. "You look like you didn't sleep a wink, darling." Vanessa Sterling glided into the room in a silk robe, her dark hair perfect even at this hour, her smile polished to a shine. She'd been part of Adrian's life for the better part of a year. Elegant, ambitious, always certain of what was best for everyone around her, especially for Lily. "Something happened last night," Adrian said. Lily spoke. Vanessa paused, just for a fraction of a second, before her smile widened. "That's wonderful." But her eyes didn't match her mouth. "Although you know what Dr. Reyes said, these little flickers, they can be cruel. They give us false hope. It might be kinder to accept where things truly stand." Adrian set down his coffee. She smiled, Vanessa. The new housekeeper sang to her, and she smiled and asked for more. This time, Vanessa's expression cooled by a degree he didn't miss. "The housekeeper," she repeated slowly. "Adrian, I really don't think it's healthy for the staff to be inserting themselves into Lily's care. She has doctors. She has a plan. The last thing that fragile child needs is to grow attached to a woman who scrubs the floors and could vanish tomorrow." Adrian said nothing. But somewhere beneath his exhaustion, a quiet warning bell had begun to ring, and he wasn't yet sure which woman in his house he should be listening to. That morning, instead of heading to Hayes Capital, Adrian called his personal assistant, a sharp, loyal man named Martin Cross. "I need you to look into someone for me," Adrian said. "Grace Bennett, She's the new housekeeper on the upstairs staff. I don't want anything invasive, just her background, where she came from, her story. Any reason in particular, sir? She knows something she shouldn't. I need to understand how. While Martin began his quiet investigation, Adrian went looking for Grace. He found her in the upstairs laundry room, folding linens with the focused silence of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. She flinched when she saw him in the doorway. Mr. Hayes, if this is about last night, I completely understand if you want me to. I want you to come to the library, he said. Bring a cup of coffee if you'd like. This isn't a reprimand. Grace followed him down the long corridor, her hands clasped tight, her eyes scanning every room as though she expected someone to jump out and hand her a termination letter. When they reached the library, a grand, wood-paneled room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Connecticut hills, she sat on the very edge of her chair as if ready to bolt. Grace, Adrian began, his voice deliberately gentle. I'm not going to fire you. What you did last night, Lily hasn't spoken in months. She hasn't smiled. She hasn't wanted anything. And in one night, you gave her something no doctor, no specialist, no amount of money has been able to give her. Grace's shoulders dropped slightly, but the tension in her face remained. But I need you to be honest with me. That song, where did you learn it? Grace stared at her hands in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I learned it from the woman who wrote it. The room went completely still. You knew Claire, Adrian said. It wasn't a question. Grace closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were glistening. I didn't know her as your wife, Mr. Hayes. I didn't know her last name, didn't know about this house, about you, about any of it. I knew her as Claire. The woman in room 7. Room 7, Adrian repeated, confused. At Valley Hope Hospice, during her last weeks. Grace's voice trembled but held. I was a volunteer there. I played guitar for the patients, sat with them, helped them feel less alone. Claire was my last patient. She was the kindest soul I've ever met. Adrian felt the floor shift beneath him. His wife's final weeks, the weeks he'd spent buried in meetings, telling himself the nurses were enough, promising himself he'd visit more tomorrow. Those weeks had been spent with this woman, this stranger who now folded his linens. She taught you the song, he murmured. She sang it to me one afternoon and asked me to learn it. She said, Grace's voice cracked. She said, if I don't make it home, someone needs to know Lily's song. Adrian couldn't speak. The words hit him like a freight train. His wife, in her final days, had handed Lily's song to a stranger because she wasn't sure her husband would be there to sing it himself. And she'd been right. She talked about Lily every single day, Grace continued, tears running freely now. She told me her daughter had the brightest laugh in the world. She said Lily loved butterflies and hated the sound of thunder. She made me promise, if I ever met a child who was scared and alone, I'd sing that song. Because that song, she said, had the power to make any little girl feel safe. And you kept that promise, Adrian whispered. I didn't plan any of this, Mr. Hayes. When I took this job, I had no idea whose house it was. I came here because I needed work. When I saw Lily for the first time, lying in that bed, so small, so still, something inside me broke. I recognized her, not her face, but her name. Claire's Lily, the little girl from all those stories. Grace wiped her eyes. I couldn't walk past that door at night and do nothing. I just couldn't. Adrian leaned back in his chair and pressed both hands against his face. Behind his closed eyes, he saw Claire, smiling, singing, trusting a stranger with the only thing she had left to give. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Because who would believe me? Grace said simply. I'm the woman who mops your floors, Mr. Hayes. If I walked up to you and said I knew your dead wife and she taught me a secret lullaby, you would have called security. She was right. He would have. And that truth made him feel smaller than any business failure ever had. "There's something else," Grace said, and her voice dropped so low Adrian had to lean forward. "Claire gave me something. On her last day, she could barely speak, but she pressed it into my hand and said, 'Keep it safe. One day, you'll know what to do with it.'" "What was it?" "A letter, sealed, addressed to Lily for her 7th birthday." Adrian's heart stopped. Lily's 7th birthday was 3 weeks away. "You've had a letter from my wife, for our daughter, this entire time?" "I've carried it with me for over a year, Mr. Hayes. I didn't know how to find you. I didn't know who you were. And then I walked into this house, and I saw the photos on the mantle, and I realized the Claire I loved was your Claire, and your Lily was the little girl she never stopped talking about." Adrian stood up abruptly, walked to the window, and stared out at the grounds without seeing them. His chest ached with something too large for the room to hold. Grief and gratitude and guilt all tangled together in a knot he wasn't sure he'd ever untangle. "That letter," he said without turning around. "You'll give it to her, on her birthday, personally." "If you'll let me, sir, nothing in this world would mean more." But the fragile peace forming inside that library had enemies it didn't yet know about. Vanessa Sterling had been standing in the hallway outside, close enough to catch fragments. Claire's name, a letter, Lily's birthday. She hadn't heard everything, but she'd heard enough. And what she heard terrified her. For the past year, Vanessa had carefully positioned herself as the woman who would fill the void Claire left behind. She managed Adrian's social calendar, attended galas on his arm, and had slowly convinced him that Lily's condition was permanent, that acceptance, not hope, was the healthy path forward. A recovering Lily was dangerous to Vanessa. A Lily who laughed and spoke and bonded with the housekeeper was a catastrophe. Because if Adrian's daughter came back to life, Adrian wouldn't need Vanessa to hold him together anymore. And if a letter from Claire surfaced, a letter full of a dead woman's love, Vanessa's place in this house would evaporate overnight. She pulled out her phone and made a call. "Robert, I need you to run a background check on someone. Deep, Grace Bennett. She's staff here. I want everything. Debts, records, anything that doesn't look clean. And I need it fast." That same afternoon, Martin Cross delivered his findings to Adrian in the study. The folder was thin but devastating. "Grace Bennett, born in Hartford," Martin began. "Full scholarship to the New England Conservatory of Music. Gifted vocalist and guitarist. Her professors called her a once-in-a-generation talent. She was on track to perform internationally. What happened? She married a man named James Bennett, a carpenter who built custom instruments. They had a son, Leo, now 5 years old. 3 years ago, James was killed in a warehouse collapse. Faulty structure, ignored safety reports. Grace sued the property company, lost everything in legal fees, no compensation. The company's lawyers buried her. Adrian's stomach turned. She lost her career, her husband, and her savings. All of it, sir. She dropped out of the conservatory, took cleaning jobs, and spent her free time volunteering at hospices, playing guitar for patients. That's how she ended up at Valley Hope. That's how she met your wife." Adrian closed the folder slowly. The woman mopping his floors was a concert-level musician who had been crushed by the same kind of corporate machine he ran every day. "Martin, the company that owned that warehouse. Do we know who they are?" Martin hesitated. "That's the part I wanted to tell you in person, sir." He slid a second page across the desk. "The warehouse was owned by Sterling Property Group." Adrian read the name twice. 3 times. "Sterling," he said flatly. "Yes, sir. Founded and operated by Richard Sterling, Vanessa Sterling's father." The room seemed to lose all its air. Adrian stared at the page, connecting the dots with the speed of a man who'd spent his life reading deals and sensing traps. Vanessa's family had destroyed Grace's life, and now Vanessa was living under the same roof, whispering in his ear that the housekeeper was a threat. Adrian didn't confront Vanessa, not yet. He needed to think, to be certain, to understand the full shape of what was unfolding in his own home. But while he calculated, Vanessa moved. That evening, she cornered Grace in the kitchen corridor. "You seem to be settling in nicely," Vanessa said, leaning against the doorframe with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Word of advice, though. This family has boundaries. Adrian is a generous man, but generosity has limits. Don't mistake kindness for an invitation to overstep." Grace met her gaze steadily. "I'm just doing my job, Ms. Sterling." "Make sure that's all you're doing." Vanessa walked away, heels clicking on marble. Grace stood still for a long moment, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from the familiar sting of being reminded exactly where the world thought she belonged. But Vanessa wasn't finished with words. She needed action. That night, while the house slept, she let herself into Grace's small staff room on the ground floor. She moved quickly, quietly, with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every step. She found what she was looking for almost immediately: Grace's worn leather bag, the one she carried everywhere, the one that held the only possessions she valued. Vanessa reached into her coat and pulled out a diamond pendant, a piece from Adrian's private safe, a necklace that had belonged to Claire. She'd taken it hours earlier using the code Adrian had never thought to change after giving it to her months ago for a charity event. She tucked the pendant deep inside Grace's bag, beneath a folded scarf, and slipped out of the room without a sound. The pendant would be reported missing by morning. The search would lead to Grace's belongings. And when Adrian opened that bag and found his dead wife's necklace hidden inside, no explanation on earth would save the housekeeper. It was clean. It was elegant. It was devastating. The next morning, Vanessa played her part flawlessly. "Adrian," she said at breakfast, her face arranged in perfect concern, "I went to get the diamond pendant, Claire's pendant, the one you keep in the safe, and it's gone." Adrian's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "That's impossible. No one has the combination except—" He caught himself. "Except Vanessa." But the thought didn't fully form, because Vanessa was already ahead of him. "I'm not accusing anyone," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "But with new staff in the house, maybe we should just do a quiet check, for everyone's peace of mind." Adrian's jaw tightened. Something felt wrong, deeply, instinctively wrong, but the pendant was Claire's. It was the last piece of jewelry he'd ever bought her, the one she'd worn to their final anniversary dinner. If it was truly missing, he couldn't ignore it. "Fine," he said, "but quietly. I don't want anyone humiliated." Vanessa nodded, hiding the satisfaction that coiled behind her eyes like a snake waiting to strike. The search took less than an hour. Vanessa guided the head of housekeeping through the staff quarters with careful, rehearsed efficiency, room by room, locker by locker, until they reached Grace's bag. The head of housekeeping opened it hesitantly. She moved aside the folded scarf. And there it was, Claire's diamond pendant, catching the light like a silent scream. "Mr. Hayes," the woman said, her face pale, "you need to see this." Adrian stood in the doorway of the staff room. Grace was behind him, still holding a stack of fresh towels, unaware that her world was about to collapse. When she saw the pendant dangling from the housekeeper's fingers, the towels slipped from her arms. "No," Grace whispered. "No. That's not... I never touched that. I don't even know what that is." "It's my wife's necklace," Adrian said. His voice was quiet, controlled, but his eyes were searching her face with a desperation that cut deeper than any accusation. "Mr. Hayes, I swear to you, I have never seen that pendant before in my life. Someone put it there. Someone is trying to—" "The evidence is quite clear," Vanessa said from the hallway, arms crossed, her tone dripping with manufactured sympathy. "I'm sorry, Grace. I really am." Grace looked at Adrian, not at Vanessa, not at the staff, at him. She searched his face for the man who had knelt beside his daughter's bed, who had listened to her story in the library, who had wept when she told him about Claire's final words. And she saw it, just for a heartbeat, a flicker of doubt, Not doubt in her, doubt in himself. The doubt of a man being pulled in two directions, wanting to trust what he knew in his gut but staggered by the sight of his dead wife's necklace in a stranger's bag. That flicker was enough. Grace straightened her back. She reached into her bag, removed the only thing inside that truly belonged to her, a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, addressed in Claire's handwriting to Lily, on your 7th birthday, and placed it gently on the table. That letter is your daughter's, Grace said, her voice steady despite the tears rolling down her cheeks. Claire trusted me with it. I'm trusting you with it now. Then she walked to the corner, picked up her guitar, the old battered instrument she carried everywhere, and held it against her chest. Keep the pendant. Search my whole life if you want. You'll find nothing, because there is nothing to find. She walked out the front door without looking back. The house went silent. Adrian stood frozen, staring at the envelope on the table, his wife's handwriting, her final gift, delivered by the woman he had just let walk out of his home. And upstairs, in her bed, Lily waited for a lullaby that would not come that night, or the next, or the one after that. Within days, Lily collapsed back into silence. She stopped speaking, stopped turning her head toward the door, stopped asking for anything at all. The machines beside her bed beeped on, steady and indifferent, but the spark that had flickered in her eyes was gone. Dr. Reyes delivered his verdict in the hallway outside her room, and his voice carried the weight of a man choosing his words carefully. She was responding, Adrian. For the first time in a year, something was reaching her. Whatever that connection was, the voice, the song, the presence, it was working on a level that medicine simply cannot replicate. And now it's been severed. He paused. If she doesn't reconnect with that stimulus soon, I'm afraid we'll lose the window entirely. What does that mean, entirely? It means she stops trying, emotionally, psychologically. The body follows the mind, Mr. Hayes, and her mind is deciding there's nothing left worth staying for. Adrian walked into his study and locked the door. He sat in the dark for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Martin Cross. Find Grace Bennett, now. I don't care what it takes. But Grace had vanished, with the thoroughness of a woman who already knew what it meant to lose everything and start from zero. No forwarding address, no trail. Martin checked shelters, churches, community centers, schools where her son Leo might have enrolled. Nothing. Meanwhile, the truth found its way to Adrian through the most unlikely source. Mrs. Dawson, the estate's longtime cook, appeared at his study door one evening, twisting a dish towel in her hands. Sir, I've worked in this house for 11 years. I've held my tongue through things that weren't my business. But this is different. This is about a child, your child, and my conscience can't carry it anymore. Adrian looked up. What is it? The night that pendant went missing, I was in the kitchen prepping for the morning. From where I stand, I can see straight down the corridor to the staff rooms. She swallowed hard. I saw Ms. Sterling go into Grace's room, sir. She was inside for several minutes. She came out with nothing in her hands because she'd left something behind. The words landed like a hammer. Grace didn't take that necklace, Mrs. Dawson said firmly. In all my years, I know the difference between honest hands and guilty ones. That young woman is innocent. Adrian closed his eyes. Every piece fell into place. Vanessa's insistence on the search, her manufactured concern, the way she'd steered everything toward Grace from the very first morning. And underneath it all, the deeper truth Martin had uncovered, Vanessa's own family had destroyed Grace's life years ago. He stood, walked to Vanessa's room, and opened the door without knocking. She was sitting at her vanity, brushing her hair, and when she saw his face, the brush stopped mid-stroke. We need to talk, Adrian said. And for the first time in this house, someone is going to tell the truth. Your father's company killed Grace's husband, Adrian said. Sterling Property Group, the warehouse collapse, the buried lawsuit. You knew, and you planted Claire's pendant to destroy the one person who was saving my daughter, Vanessa's face drained white. Her mouth opened, but Adrian raised his hand. Mrs. Dawson saw you enter her room that night. Don't insult me with a denial. The silence stretched. Then Vanessa's mask crumbled, not into remorse, but into the cold fury of someone whose game has been exposed. I did what I had to do, she hissed. That woman was a threat. She was worming her way into your life, into Lily's. She was healing my daughter, and you couldn't stand it, because a healed Lily meant you'd lose your grip on me. Vanessa stared at him, and in her eyes he saw the truth she'd never say out loud. She hadn't loved him. She'd loved his empire. Get out of my house, Adrian said quietly. Tonight. Vanessa left within the hour, taking nothing but her suitcase and her silence. No one walked her to the door. Adrian turned to Martin. Find Grace, whatever it takes. Don't stop until you do. It took 3 days. Martin finally traced a small community shelter outside Hartford, a place called Second Dawn. A woman had arrived recently with a little boy and an old guitar. She'd registered under a false name, but her son kept telling everyone that his father lived inside the strings. Adrian drove through the night. He found her sitting on a bench in the shelter courtyard, Leo asleep against her shoulder, the guitar leaning beside her like a loyal companion. She looked thinner. Shadows lived under her eyes, but her back was straight, a dignity no humiliation could bend. Grace? She looked up. Surprise, then pain, then the hard wall of distrust. Vanessa planted the pendant, he said. I have proof. Mrs. Dawson saw everything. He stepped closer. Your husband died because of her family's negligence. She knew who you were, and she tried to destroy you a second time. Grace's eyes filled, but she didn't blink. And I let you walk out, Adrian said, his voice breaking. That's on me. I failed you the way I failed Claire, by not being there when it mattered most. He knelt in front of her. Lily is fading, Grace. The doctors say we're losing her. She needs your voice. She needs you. And on her birthday, in 9 days, she needs the letter her mother left behind. Grace looked down at Leo, at the guitar, at the man kneeling before her. Claire told me something on her last day, Grace whispered. She said, music doesn't fix what's broken. It reminds us what's worth keeping. 9 days later, Grace sat beside Lily's bed and sang the lullaby one final time. Then she placed Claire's letter in her daughter's small hands. Lily opened it, read her mother's words, and for the first time in over a year, she laughed, and somewhere beyond the silence, a mother's song kept playing, carried by the woman she'd trusted, for the little girl she'd never stopped loving. And that's where our story ends today. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something real, then please do me one small favor. Hit that like button because it tells me you want more stories like this. Hit subscribe and tap that bell so you never miss the next one. And most importantly, drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done if you were Adrian? Would you have trusted Grace from the beginning, or would you have doubted her too? I read every single comment, and I'd love to hear your answer. Thank you for watching till the very end. It means everything. I'll see you in the next one.